Hello, Agnis. Waiting for the audio.
Yes,
It's always a little jarring because I see you first with the bow tie and the suit, and then not.
it is. Yeah, it's at least a good icebreaker. I had the same experience yesterday. There was this call related to the conference and their steering committee, and they said exactly the same thing. They said, "Oh, yes, it's the first to see your picture and the bow tie, and then it's not there." So yes, anticipation, expectation, those kind of aspects of our lives.
Yes, which affect our status and perception and which games we play and not play. Yeah.
Yeah, and if we speak about the bow ties, so we know that historically all of these possibilities for people to make them look differently by
Mm,
wearing different clothes and different um, what was that? What's the category for the
accessories?
ties and both accessories? Yes, and yes, this is one way to differentiate yourself, right? So you can
Mhm.
have a red bow tie or a blue bow tie, or yeah.
Or even just when I was growing up, like ties were a huge status thing, right? That was what meant you were an adult or a man. And my first job in California was at a management consulting firm. So I got a stylist and bought a suit and ties and all these things. And then once I got to Apple, um, you know, the idea of a dress code didn't exist.
And again, those are the reflections of our cultures. And some people cannot live without specific guidance of how to dress. And that's just because of they were brought up with this perception they possibly so their parents specifically dressing up every morning. And this is just so obvious for a kid to expect, oh, this is what I'm going to do when I grow up.
Or
Something
even
like
if you
that.
don't, then when you join a tribe, they insist on it, right? Like, so I wasn't
Exactly.
planning to wear a suit as an academic, but when I went into management consulting, it was clear that this is the norms of the of this tribe, and this is how we, uh, demonstrate who we are to the rest of the world. And very much in Silicon Valley, it's also even though it's uh, we don't have a dress code, there is a certainly social norming that goes on. And like one of the funny things is if you show up at the office wearing a suit, everyone assumes you're interviewing somewhere.
Yeah. Indeed. And at least one basic thing that is even um, beyond our conscious, let's say, assessment of the suits or ties is that it looks good and it looks sharp.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever way we think about it, it just makes the appearance of a person more elegant.
Right.
And that speaks
It is a signal that someone has spent time and money and effort to create that look.
as well. And I would
Yeah.
say there are
And
these
there's a
two
certain
elements.
aesthetic. Yeah.
I think that those two elements are intertwined. And
Mhm.
then once we start to put or attach our perception about status or the time that person has spent to get it done or to earn it or to just dress herself or himself, that's one. And that still, I think, has a large portion of the cognitive and potentially psychological bias in that, because it's
Yeah.
assessed through the rational and logical way of thinking, while aesthetic beauty and just appealing to your eye is something that really triggers deeper down into your
Mm.
subconscious, so whether you like it or not. And I think the
Mm.
one big element in that is that just it looks more appealing, because you imagine we have different shapes of the body, and
Yeah.
then when you dress like men and then you dress in a nice looking suit, it just, your appearance is made like very stylish
Yeah.
by the lines and everything. And this is not any way like really directly assessed by your conscious or intellectual. It's just like you like it because it looks good, and there is
Right.
no other kind of element to that.
Yeah. Although it's interesting, like, so are you kind of arguing that beauty is deeper than status?
Yeah.
Yeah. Although the certainly one could argue it goes the other way too, right? How our cultural notions of beauty get shifted based on high status individuals.
Yes. I don't have any data on
Yeah.
this topic except my own
Yeah.
experience and my feeling around that.
Yeah.
What I've realized that many other people really, when they go into unfolding or decoupling the key ingredients of what makes up a human being, and I think that's one of the qualities it's expressed by the human being, ability to enjoy the beauty or to have the sense of beauty. And I think that's that resonated with me when the person described these qualities. And there were three major qualities that is essential for human and not essential possibly for other living organisms or things around. And one of those was this, and that's why I remember it. So whether a cat or dog would consider something beautiful or not, I don't know, but I think definitely people can feel it. Like right away, you could, like people can go to a museum first time and see like a new art. And then some people would say, I don't like it. Some people would say, I like it. And then we have these masterpieces over the centuries, which means most of the people, like 95%, really like something about it. And
Right.
I think that's how
Yeah.
it's
I think the
how the
most
beauty
scientific
speaks.
analysis of that is what they call the Hudson Valley School. Are you familiar with this trope? So the idea
Yeah.
is that if you see a grassy meadow in like with gently rolling hills and a river running through it and some signs of wildlife, you as a human being will see that as like a wonderful place to be because that matches the most fertile versions of the savannas we evolved in. There's something hardwired in our brains around that.
I think that speaks to the
Yeah.
same
Yeah. And I think,
angle or the
yeah.
same
So,
feeling.
yeah. And actually, that brings up the other thing I thought about, like the weakness in the model that I had of status games and resource games is it doesn't really include art, right? There's an art that we do just for ourselves, like journaling, that um, at least doesn't have an extra psychic status game. Maybe it has an intrapsychic status game of sorts that we're playing, but that is I think there's certainly a strong claim that human beings are the only species that labor for art's sake.
Yeah, I'm not insisting, I'm not claiming, I'm not kind of, but that was a revelation for me. So before that, I would look at a human being with the capacity to use the intellect. But also there are also some degrees of intellect in many other species too. So that wouldn't be like a very kind of distinguishing factor or the quality. But then when that person said, oh, these are the three, and I don't remember the two other ones. Oh, I remember now. So the other one was, I don't remember exactly the name, what he used, but that expressed the continuity. What's the word? Continuity? Continuity. So it's continuous, which means through the generations we are passing on, and especially nowadays it's so easy, all the accumulated knowledge and so forth. But also in the older days when there was no printing, there was this habit of keeping things going generation after generation. So that's kind of, you make your life eternal pretty much. Depends how much you pass over. And that's also very distinct, like very significant. I don't know any specific
Three
rule,
things, right? The
but
three things where there's sort of our intellect, there's our sort of our heritage.
so the phenomena that human beings can and they do continue their lives throughout the generations, which means you create something and then it's remains with the next generation, and then with the next generation, and they create more. And that's how the whole evolution actually is expressed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not very specific to other
Right. So
representatives.
the idea of culture
Yeah.
or memes and things like that.
Yes. And there was a third one. So maybe I don't remember. Maybe intelligence as such, but if I think like a living organism has some degree of some
Cognition.
intelligence,
Yeah.
at least.
So the three were then like intelligence, aesthetic appreciation, and culture, or something like that, or the desire for passing on to the next generation.
Yeah, I
Something
cannot
like that.
remember exactly, but that was very mind-opening also for me to realize, okay, we humans, how do we actually can be described in a way that no one else would be mixing up us with something else? So what are those qualities? And then that person said, because he's working on kind of descriptive way to label things, because it's also very important when you start to build algorithms, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you try to describe the cultures or societies, so that you specifically speak about one thing, and in this case that's a human being, and you can give the qualities to some sort of the system that would later operate with these concepts, that whoever is using it or whatever happens, the system is clearly knowing, okay, now I'm dealing with a human being or with something else, and those are the qualities that has to be there to describe the concept.
Right. I mean, I guess the old framing used to be the man is a rational animal from the Scholastics and Aristotle, and it was also very much a very male-centric view.
Right.
But it was interesting. That was one reason why artificial intelligence was, I think, such a trope, was the idea of what makes us human is our ability to do logical calculations. And if computers can do logical calculations, then is there anything left to being human?
Yeah, it's interesting. Anyways, speaking about your endeavor to create this game and like build the algorithm for it, how it's gonna be working, and of course everything has to start somewhere, so I think it's a great start. And as you pointed out, there's other components that would be impacting. So if you want to really kind of make a mirroring the real world, or at least to the game-like experience, okay, this early version is not including art or beauty or other things, but then it's really what makes you passionate about stuff. And obviously your passion is about understanding things and putting them into the algorithms, and also describing the phenomena, and then giving the opportunity for people to play and then realize how it works. So instead of like engaging their cognitive listening, you are getting them this opportunity to play with it. So that's great. I mean, if you love doing that, and there might be many other people that would support your trajectory.
Right. So I mean, that was a thing, right? It was just the and you know, it's not necessarily the thing, right? So interestingly, the way that I've been counter framing the man as a rational animal is that humans are reflective social animals, and so I thought it would be good to reflect on, so you know, whether this is a finale or an inflection point. It's probably good to think about what were our initial aspirations when we started this conversation. What have we learned? And, you know, what are sort of our takeaways for whatever happens next? So when we started out, I think the thing that the best simple phrase we came up with was this idea of a humantific revolution, right? Is could we come up with a different way of approaching the world during this COVID-19 season that could help lead to the kind of broad-scale social transformation that the scientific revolution did, but more focused around self-mastery and human flourishing, than technical mastery and material flourishing. Is that
Right.
where we started?
Yeah, around that. So we were just speaking out our minds,
Yeah.
and of course sharing it. That's always the entry point. It's even from when the kids go to school, they meet 20 other kids, and it's so interesting what everybody does. And then gradually they kind of drift towards like a coupling or grouping around the specific topics of interest. But yes, our overlap was in the spectrum of knowing, like both of us having this technology skilled background in so many ways,
Mm-hmm.
and understanding how things around people can be constantly improved, and they really have been designed better and placed more frequently, and actually gotten to the point that they are to some degree occupying our days and attention.
Mm-hmm.
And this notion that people have left themselves behind in their human evolution, like internally, is the topic. And I think this is what you just mentioned, this humane revolution or humanistic revolution. That was the trajectory. And then there are different ways how people can contribute to that understanding or refining the knowledge, and then sharing science, and then practice and games and experiences. So that's great.
Yeah. So just in terms of where we started to where we are now, what's been the most helpful to you? What has been in line with whatever emotional energy you came into this with?
So for me, there are so many things happening simultaneously. It's just, I sometimes look at my performance over the week, and it feels, and let me give you just an example. So there was one event, and I thought, okay, they recorded it. It was a Zoom call, and there were almost 100 people, and it was a nice conversation. I thought, oh, I would like to have the video recording, just to see maybe there are some snippets I could like cut out and use for expressing certain thoughts that I'm currently are working on, and would be helpful for other people. And I think, oh, it's so long that they are not sending me this recording. And it just was 3 days ago. And it, to me, it felt like 2 weeks. Like seriously, I thought, must be that event was like most likely, like from today's perspective, last Tuesday. That was my internal clock saying. And then I looked, no, it was this Tuesday, so 3 days ago. So therefore, if you ask me the question, what would be the major takeaways from this particular engagement that we are have been doing, I cannot like separate anything particular except the fact that I know you, and it's so pleasant to discuss with you, and we have intelligent minds, and we also have very human-driven perspectives on lives. What's really important, what really makes us a being, and therefore, I think that would be the major contribution, which is knowing you and knowing another person who has a similar way of seeing the world in a better colors, let's say, or in a better shape, and also a similar background that gives us understanding the role of technology in the lives of human being, instead of those who might not have any particular experiences with technology, so they treat them as unknown animals, and therefore might not be in a good, let's say, informed status, let's say, to really have a holistic picture, especially for this area of intertwined reality between technologies and human beings, which we cannot ignore. It's just, that's the way how we have the societies right now and cultures. Not everyone, of course, but mostly what we're speaking about, developed countries.
Great, thanks. I think for me, certainly the biggest benefit, one, meeting a kindred spirit has been exciting, and also just the sense of being back in at least sort of a para-academic setting, having the ability to discuss big ideas and argue about them and play with ideas. And I think the interesting thing about both of us is we both have this ambivalence towards technology. Like, we're familiar with it, we use it, we love it, but we are also suspicious of it, right? Because technology, it was a essay I heard on philosophy of technology, and it's a lot of people do philosophy of science. Very few people do philosophy of technology. And what she was saying is that the logic of technology is you start measuring something, and then you optimize that thing you measured to reduce the time and energy it takes to get the thing you want. And that is, I see that to be true. And that's when the machine starts running us. And Tim O'Reilly talks about how Wall Street is essentially already a rogue AI, where we have an objective function that is running rampant over the wills of individual human beings. And while that might be an overstretched metaphor, it certainly explains a lot of the dynamics. One of on the other hand, like, rejecting technology is not an option for a bunch of things. I was thinking about this. I was studying different kinds of thinking a while ago, and I came up with kind of a set of 6 things that I want to both cultivate myself and also figure out how to teach. And that was critical thinking, systems thinking, model thinking, design thinking, computational thinking, and then the last one I most recently discovered was studio thinking, which is how artists approach how they think about their work. And as the idea that when you teach kids art, you shouldn't just be teaching them how to draw, but this whole mindset of thinking like an artist, which they call studio thinking. And I think there's a lot of those themes that came out in this conversation about going through different types of thinking. So it feels like this is the start of a journey. And, I think it's been, someone said there are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. Right?
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
And this has been one of those weeks, a few of those weeks. It's been about a month for us here, sheltering in place. And people already start talking about the before times, before COVID, what world was like. And, one thing I've realized is that, like, I've been incredibly privileged, but I don't want to go back to the person I was before this. And so I'm starting to negotiate with my boss and my family, like, I don't want to stay locked in my house forever, but I would like to maintain that level of relaxed pace and attitude toward life and still be productive, but not necessarily be frenetic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so
it is. I think that's one of the transformations that it is happening and will continuously exposing its effect. And I believe, like, people have had a chance and have chance to experience a different daily routine, and also see how differently things can be done with the same results or better results too. Mm-hmm. Not everyone, of course, but many. And therefore that's irreversible. That's really because it makes sense. I mean, results are that matter predominantly, I think, in the
yeah, or the idea that once you have a transformational experience, I think we discussed at the very beginning, right? It changes your values, and you realize, right, wow, this thing is actually important to me that I had totally forgotten.
Reflecting on your thinking styles, or I don't exactly remember how you mentioned, but yes, that's a very interesting collection, and that would be, I'm sure you're gonna write a post about it. Do it. It's very interesting because people, again, they got into their own. I remember one professor from the MIT Media Lab, Sandy Pentland. He wrote the book Social Physics, and then also one of his descriptives was that people live in echo chambers. Echo chambers means because you have a strong ties and you constantly communicate with the same people, that chamber echoes back what you expect to happen. So your potentially innovation power is limited to the chamber if you don't realize that. And then you feel like the world is like your chamber, but it's not. That's one thing. So therefore, the collection of the different types of thinking is great reminder for those who are specifically predominantly being in one of those or two of those. And even when you started to mention system thinking, I was like, okay. And then later you mentioned computational thinking, and I was like, right, they are different. For me, they are different. And but I would never kind of, if you would give me, I don't know, 2 hours to list the different kinds of thinking, I might be just putting them together. Like, okay, that's related to computers. Okay, that's the one thing. Maybe, I don't know which word I would pick, but just one, not two. And that's great, you're putting out 2. Another thing to reflect that you mentioned about we become suspicious about technology. And if I translate it into the work that I currently do, it's all about the inner ability to know things in our DNA. I mean, I refer conceptually to the DNA. We have the awareness on the biological level, like signaling comes from us. And especially when we see the reflection of the world through the social interactions, as I sometimes portray, like other people's genes speak to my genes. Like if I see a person differently, it triggers, first of all, I kind of observe it, but not understand it. And because the new thing in a person is mirrored in me, and that wakes up that part in me that also understands what has happened with the person, but my cognition is not catching up yet. So there is no explanation. I just feel it. The person is more calm. The person is more decisive. The person has more dedication to achieve the goals, which wasn't present for the last 10 years that you knew the person, but now it's there. And you kind of immediately, your body is like, what's this? Is it the same person? It is. But then it says, oh, he has, or she has something now activated that really gives the person the new style in life, in the particular behavior. And why do you recognize it? Because you have it. Otherwise, it would be just go unnoticed. And because you kind of feel the person is different without like cognitive involvement, that's why I'm speaking about this social mirroring, and also the genes that know much more that we consciously have figured out in reading books and contemplating about life. Then coming back to technology is, if we become suspicious about technology, what actually is happening, the technology is mirroring the intentions of its creators, right? So instead of about technology, which is a little bit kind of like making a distance, but no, we are becoming suspicious about the people and their intentions and their biases that are represented by the technologies that we are experiencing.
And not even so much their conscious intentions, although there's plenty of that, but just the subconscious assumptions, right? The echo chambers that they live in of what is worthwhile and worth measuring.
Oh yes, you mentioned the Wall Street. That's a big echo chamber.
And I think that's an interesting, one of the many interesting conversations that's happening is, the financial incentives, and that have given us the world we have now. It's like, are these working for us? And one thing that I've been playing with is like, I've been using the phrase the Great Reset to describe this season of everything kind of being paused. And I've also been trying to figure out a word to describe like this thing that I want to become. Like, I want to become one of these people who say, yes, this was a historic, once in a lifetime, once in a millennium opportunity to step back and examine our lives from a distance. And I know so many people who just want to go back to the way things were. They want to just forget about this and move on and go back to normal. And I don't. And so I've been trying to figure out a word to describe that mindset. Like, everything has changed, or at least I have changed, and I see everything differently. So I've been, the best word I've come up with so far is a resetter, in line with, say, preppers or truthers or birthers on the more negative side, but to say like, and that's one of the interesting things I'm looking for to see as the world emerges. Are there any places or collectives? Because you do need what is it? You need people who are like-minded who disagree, so you can have meaningful arguments. And so that's interesting to see if spaces emerge for having those kinds of discussions.
Oh yes, that's very interesting. I never thought about that. Of course, we experience, but you, as you are inclined to conceptualize very well and you spot out like what would be the potential, definitely there would be sub groups of people arranging around specific point of view, and there will be supporters that, yes, that was a great transformation, we should keep going, and then the other ones that say it was just a pain and I don't want it anymore.
Yeah.
And there might be even some third and fourth that would be actually maybe trying to draw some ideas from both camps and trying to be very central.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a good question. So you just planted an idea to my mind, and we know that the most resilient parasite is an idea. It's gonna get its way out. So whenever I come up with my reflection of how to potentially label or give some kind of etiquette to these groups, yeah, I'll let you know, definitely.
All right. So maybe on that note, it's 6:30, and I think we wanted to wrap up this session. And maybe wrap up this series where, we wanted the first few weeks to try and meet fairly frequently, and then just, I guess, leave it open-ended. We'll chat on WhatsApp and LinkedIn, and if we get to the point where we feel like there's enough material for another conversation, let's have one.
Exactly. I think that's also the best, because we will internally feel, oh, I want to discuss this. Oh, and that's the best person that I would like to discuss with. And I think that then it's emerging more naturally. So I fully agree. Yeah. Let's do that. And we definitely will be in touch, but then we don't know exactly when and about what topic.
Here's one request though. I would like to start a LinkedIn group. Resetters would be my working title, but you mentioned I planted a seed in your head. So over the next week or two, see if any other names occur to you, and I will ping you on LinkedIn, like, do you have an idea for a name? And then I'm gonna start using that framing to see, there's other people who I think are talking about this or thinking along these lines that could become part of that thing. That seems like the cheapest thing to create would be a LinkedIn group.
Yes. Indeed. And just to give you one reflection right away, I've noticed even separate groups that possibly don't know about each other are starting to use one word for their groups. And I don't want to impose that this should be here. I think we have more creative power to come up with another one. So they speak about superhumans, and that's not just a one group. I know already two people, at least, or two groups of people that use a superhuman.
In this context, or in like the Great Reset, or more, because I tend to hear that more in like the transhumanist singularity crowd.
Yes, mostly about your self-development and self-discovery. And of course, that's a big opportunity during these times. But that's why I said, I just saw this, but I'm sure what you are intending, and I hear what you're saying, is a slightly different perspective. It's just about these people that took this opportunity to live a different life. So they are the supporters and the drivers of sustainable change, or keeping this new model going and actually refining and improving it. But thanks to this event, big circumstance.
Yeah. The other word I was playing with was resilientist, but that is kind of hard to say.
Let's leave it to the subconscious to work.
Just throw some more seeds in there. All right. Thank you, Agnis. It has been a joy and an honor and a pleasure. And I look forward to our next conversation, whatever and whenever it is.
Yes. Thank you.
Same
here. Yes, you too. Take care.
Yes.